The initial days of imprisonment brimmed with unease, quietude, and wary looks as scores of Japanese POWs passed through the thorny enclosures of the U.S. facility. They showed up in tattered attire, layers of perspiration and soil embedded in the cloth following prolonged combat and capitulation. The grueling treks, the perpetual grit from coastal paths, and the merciless island swelter had drained their strength, yet nothing could have readied them for the oddity lurking within. Following enrollment, health inspections, and handouts of essential items, they were ushered into a spacious timber structure featuring conduits snaking across the ceiling. The setup halted several in place. It bore no resemblance to the setups they'd encountered across the Pacific Theater. Broad lines of spigots jutted from iron tubing, each positioned above a grating. The U.S. sentries, prompt and methodical, signaled for them to disrobe and form queues. For numerous individuals, the realization dawned that this wasn't mere confinement. They were being urged to cleanse themselves. Bewilderment rippled through the group. During the conflict, hygiene for Japanese troops was infrequent, typically makeshift amid streams or oceans, and perpetually limited by scarcities. Cleansers were viewed as indulgences, but now, under the watch of their avowed foes, they faced a structured ceremony of purification. A few gripped their possessions tightly, suspecting deception. Others muttered anxiously about the vapor emanating from the conduits. They recalled stories disseminated by commanders prior to yielding, depicting Americans as savage, imprisonment as degradation, and detainees as worse off than beasts. Confronting those shiny steel fixtures, they pondered if this concealed some form of torment. The sentries, irked by the delay, shouted commands in English and waved insistently. Footwear, straps, jackets, everything needed removal. Gradually, hesitant fingers undid fasteners, revealing forms marked by tropical skirmishes. The captives sensed exposure, shame amid foreigners and comrades. Nevertheless, they complied, grasping the bars of suds pressed into their hands. Then erupted the rush of fluid. From the ceiling lines surged flows of pure warmth to the skin. The abrupt heat stunned the group. Briefly they stiffened, bracing for hurt. Yet, as the streams flowed over their spines and arms, stripping away accumulations of filth, an odd serenity enveloped them. Some shut their lids, allowing the muck to funnel away. Others scrubbed tentatively with the coarse lather, as if verifying permission. Bit by bit, the early dread dissolved into subdued wonder. Such warmth and purity hadn't touched them in months, perhaps longer. In the battlegrounds they had defended, hydration was strictly portioned, ablutions absent, infestations and ailments widespread. To stand beneath an unending cascade of heated liquid, free of pails, without bellowing superiors, absent any curbs, felt like an inconceivable extravagance. Under adversary control, they achieved a level of cleanliness surpassing their own military quarters. Upon exiting, linens stood ready. Plush fabric linens piled neatly. Numerous detainees fondled them like relics from a distant realm. They patted themselves dry clumsily, unaccustomed to such material. To the Americans, this formed standard protocol. To the Japanese, it sparked enlightenment. They departed shuffling, locks moist, flesh flushed from the heat, and a clear wave of marvel circulated among them. The dread that had seized them upon entering the bathing area gave way to perplexity. Had their keepers actually offered solace rather than savagery? That inaugural brush with the facility's bathing units echoed in their thoughts for years afterward. It marked the start of revelations that upended all indoctrination about adversaries. The episode transcended mere removal of soil. It involved reckoning with the gap between propaganda and reality. The contemporary bathing system, with its boundless heated flow and lather, evolved into an emblem of broader insight. The detention need not equate to debasement, but could reveal unforeseen views into an alien culture's customs. As the initial cleansings concluded, and the detainees returned to quarters, a profound quietude blanketed the space. They perched on plank seats, some holding their creased garments, others toweling their scalps with the plush linens, still debating if they had encountered grace or veiled peril. Plenty shunned gazes as if candid talk might shatter an implicit code. Internally, though, disquiet festered. They'd been cautioned repeatedly that American seizure spelled disgrace, agony, and demise. In hushed pre-engagement talks, Japanese leaders had evoked visions of merciless foe enclosures rife with famine and mistreatment. Still, the opening imposition here was sudsy immersion in heated currents. To several, it appeared dubious, excessively benevolent, overly refined. One detainee, an ex-fleet technician from Yokosuka, he reflected on the Allied leaflets that portrayed cheerful POWs enjoying meals and relaxation. He'd long brushed them off as fabricated nonsense aimed at eroding Japanese spirits. Yet now, freshly scrubbed after months of grime, those images hit him with a shiver. Might a few have held truth? A more ominous idea soon slithered in, far more alarming. Suppose the showers weren't for washing at all. Whispers spread rapidly, particularly among those haunted by wartime propaganda echoes. A few murmured about gas chambers, linking it to hazy tales of German atrocities in Europe. Details were scarce, but the notion that Americans could twist showers into secret torment raced through the group in subdued voices. The guards picked up on the reluctance, observing as clusters of captives lingered at the thresholds, expressions shadowed by doubt. Commands echoed again, with interpreters stumbling through Japanese assurances that this was just required sanitation. Doubt lingered stubbornly, though, for troops drilled to view capitulation as worse than dying. Any kindness tasted like trickery. They pondered if the issued soap held toxins, if the steam masked foul intent. A handful even skipped full cleansing, just splashing their limbs and torsos before retreating. The cultural divide sharpened the unease. Back home, bathing evoked sacred rites in steaming onsen or public sentos steeped in tradition. Conflict had shattered that, dooming fighters to weeks of filth, overrun by parasites and battling endless ailments. These camp facilities, by contrast, screamed efficiency. Lines of metal conduits and gutters, no seclusion, running on a rigid timetable. To U.S. forces, it was straightforward sanitation, plain and simple. To the Japanese, it seemed foreign, robotic, verging on degrading. A ceremony robbed of soul, reduced to cold utility that unnerved. Prisoner talks in the following days revolved endlessly around identical puzzles. Why squander heated water on foes? Why hand out soap, linens, and leisure when neglect would suffice? Pure goodwill, or a scheme to shatter their psyches? Conjectures proliferated in the gloomy quarters. One camp held it was domination tactics, lulling warriors into vulnerability via ease. Another hinted at stealth additives in the flow. Dread persisted, bolstered by officer cautions from the past. Still, no reprisals came, no covert horrors surfaced. At dusk, the group filed back to quarters, unscathed and vital, notably fresher. Gradually, wariness chipped away, giving way to subdued, wary intrigue. The routine repeated daily thereafter. Supplies of soap flowed steadily. Overseers ensured each entered the bathing area, and catastrophe stayed absent. Distrust endured, yet blended with bewilderment. What foe fusses over captives' freshness or reduced vermin? For those schooled that imprisonment trumped demise, the insight jarred as much as the deluge itself. The hygiene cycle soon wove into daily existence, initially imposed on the detainees. Mornings or evenings, per the rota, escorts formed them into lines and escorted to the washing zone. There, they got paper-bound soap reeking of unfamiliar compounds, plus towels bearing army markings. The drill was automated. Undress, positioned beneath the jets, scour completely, towel off, reclothe, depart. Over time, as weeks accumulated, inmates grasped this as permanent policy. Neatness ranked as non-negotiable, upheld with the same rigor as lights out or head counts. Through aides, Yanks outlined cleanliness protocols, demonstrating lather techniques and demanding thorough attention to limbs, scalps, extremities, and concealed areas. Afterward came delousing scans by health staff, probing garment edges and linens. Powder treatments came with fresh linens. Many POWs first saw how adversaries prioritized illness control on par with rations or arms. To the captors, sanitation equaled vital order, vitality, and regimen in confinement. For detainees, the habit mixed shame with odd allure. They lost personal agency, ordered to cleanse like cadets. Yet relief from perpetual bites, boils, and festering cuts proved unexpectedly bearable. A corporal who'd battled on Guadalcanal recalled stretches of time when his regiment managed just one wash in filthy creeks, as infections like tropical sores ravaged his fellow troops. Yet, merely days into mandatory cleansing routines, the wounds on his limbs started mending, and the persistent hack that had tormented him slowly ebbed away. This subtle yet irrefutable progress chafed against his sense of honor, a twist that quietly undermined his self-respect. Communication hurdles sparked constant mix-ups early on. Numerous inmates failed to grasp the orders barked by overseers regarding shampooing heads or scouring soles, opting instead for the least effort possible. Attempts to bypass parts of the process led to being shoved back beneath the sprays, scrutinized until the suds formed adequately. A few grumbled about the intrusion, deeming it humiliating. Still, amid their pushback, the outcomes proved impossible to ignore. Their outfits, cleaned routinely through the facility's protocols, shed the rancid reek of decaying fabric. Bed covers carried a mild whiff of cleanser rather than perspiration and mold. The sleeping quarters, previously choked with the stink of unclean flesh, became somewhat bearable, even if certain detainees never voiced it. Bit by bit, wariness yielded to routine. Detainees started looking forward to the schedule, queuing with diminishing reluctance. They picked up the knack for washing more completely, patting dry with attention, and stacking the linens per directions. A handful even debated varieties of cleansers, observing which foamed more richly or carried a milder aroma. Though a minor point for individuals robbed of autonomy, these chats served as dialogue, a means to occupy endless stretches of downtime. What had started as an imposed decree evolved into a collective practice, subtly linking them in solidarity. What impacted them profoundly was grasping that their guards anticipated poise even in confinement. Compelling them to bathe and supplying lather wasn't solely for curbing illness, it aimed to uphold a baseline of human decency. In the imperial forces, troops learned that ease spelled frailty, that bearing dirt and agony signaled valor. But now, shaped by the adversary's regimen, they discovered that consistent hygiene could rank alongside wielding a weapon as an element of rigor. This conflict of principles rattled them, yet it planted initial hints of grudging admiration for the peculiar, unyielding structure of their keepers. The initial rush of heated liquid over their backs drew sharp intakes of breath from many Japanese captives. Some recoiled as if burned. A reliable, measured flow streamed from the ceiling pipes, unlike anything they'd known. For those used to improvised rinses in chilly waterways or quickly topped pails, it felt nearly indulgent. Vapor billowed swiftly, weaving through the atmosphere and tempering the stark illumination of the dormitory-like space. The cleanser, sharp and unfamiliar, bubbled generously across their bodies, stripping layers of accumulated filth. They applied it cautiously initially, then with greater force, astonished by how the foam adhered and sluiced off effortlessly. For a few, the experience proved intense. They hearkened back to extended patrols through dense forests, where leaders urged thrift with every bit of moisture, prioritizing endurance over neatness. On isolated outposts, soaks were scarce. Troops dabbed at themselves with scraps, their hides forever tacky from humidity, brine, and grit. Rare instances of warming liquid in tins or barrels counted as prized gifts, doled out to crowds of fighters. In this place, though, every inmate claimed his private cascade of heat as if abundance knew no bounds. It transcended mere washing, it plunged them into an alternate reality. The cloths handed out later amplified the surprise. Plush and thirstily soaking, they differed starkly from the flimsy scraps once passed around in native quarters where sharing wipes was the norm. Detainees buried their faces in the fabrics, breathing in the subtle artificial trace of washing agents. Their hides emerged refreshed, follicles cleared, the clammy residue of equatorial climes at last erased. Beyond bodily ease, it awakened feelings they'd buried deep. Certain ones evoked domestic soaks from peacetime, visions of parents filling basins with warm fluid before conflict upended everything. Others evoked communal spas, faint remnants of everyday existence. The enclosure's rinses revived those feelings, now laced with the oddity of detention. The U.S. personnel handled the drill matter-of-factly, distributing bars and cloths with the curt practicality of meal allotments. To them, it was protocol, stopping outbreaks, boosting spirits, enforcing structure. But for the inmates, it unfolded as a hushed epiphany. The contradiction stung sharply. They'd braced for brutality, only to find solace surpassing their own side's provisions. A number experienced guilt, convinced such pampering sapped their resolve. Others accepted it wordlessly, thankful for an interval that let their weary frames reclaim a touch of humanity. In the end, the rinses remolded their everyday rhythm, replacing the drudgery of clawing at parasites or overlooking festering afflictions. The inmates discovered these advantages gradually. Scalding water eased their aches and accelerated recovery. Their locks, previously oily and tangled, turned silky and simpler to brush through. The pungent odor of perspiration that had permeated their attire faded, supplanted by the subtle tang of sanitizing detergent. Even the atmosphere inside the quarters felt fresher, less oppressive, since consistent washing curbed the scents from countless individuals packed in tight spaces. Detainees started observing these shifts with surprise, silently admitting they felt fitter now than amid the fighting. This contradiction troubled their thoughts. Why would the foes they were conditioned to loathe offer them the attention their own forces had withheld? Those rinse stations went beyond mere sanitation. They demonstrated a regime so methodical and plentiful in supplies that it could afford luxuries to even those imprisoned. Beneath the cascading warmth, they inevitably experienced a mix of jealousy and discomfort. It highlighted the vast gap between this realm and the one they had abandoned, underscoring how much Japan trailed in granting such fundamental respect to its troops. As evening fell and the dorms grew dim, with endless lines of captives stretched out on their cots, discussions frequently circled back to contrasts with their past in the imperial forces. The focus wasn't on armaments or clashes, but on this odd revelation of sanitation. Veterans who'd trekked through Burma or battled in the Philippine forests now murmured about cleansers, linens, and the jolt of steaming flows. Such matters had never struck them as fitting for warriors, yet the disparity was too vivid to overlook. In the Japanese ranks, cleansing occurred infrequently, only when conditions permitted. Leaders preached resilience, dismissing bodily irritations and viewing grime as a badge of grit. Troops might endure without a proper wash for weeks, their flesh caked in dirt, their gear rigid from crusted perspiration. Vermin burrowed into fabric folds, sores from the tropics festered unchecked. The reek of unclean forms haunted every trek, every outpost, every bivouac under the stars. Voicing gripes about it marked one as feeble, unfit for a real fighter. But here in these U.S. facilities, tidiness was mandatory, on par with order and protocol. An ex-sergeant once shared how his squad in New Guinea had passed around one corroded tub of liquid for 30 soldiers. They'd splashed their faces and palms, but thorough immersion was out of the question. He likened it ruefully to the non-stop hot cascades in detention. Another fellow grumbled about how in Manuria his outfit endured frost damage, not just from the chill, but from donning the identical soiled footgear for months on end. Illness felled platoons more swiftly than gunfire, yet now, in this American setting, each individual cleaned his soles every day, while healers inspected for ailments as if tending to prized cases. The sarcasm cut deep. This awareness rippled subtly across the enclosure. Even the staunchly proud couldn't refute that their physiques were mending. Irritations cleared up, infestations vanished, wounds closed, guts that had churned from worms now calmed with steady rinses and fresher garb. Captives linked these gains to the habits they had initially spurned. For the initial time, they grasped that sanitation wasn't indulgence, it was fortitude, a defense against illness far superior to mere grit. These musings extended beyond the bodily to the societal. Plenty recalled Japan's rich heritage of shared soaks, the mountain hot springs, the timber basins in rural dwellings. Washing had been woven into existence, linked to kin and customs. Conflict had eroded it, debasing fighters to beasts scraping by in muck. In chains now, the adversaries had bestowed what their military had refused. This irony disturbed them deeply. A few discussed it wistfully, evoking images of their mothers warming pots at dusk. Others grew quiet, mortified that it was the U.S., not their homeland, reclaiming this self-respect. The sentries couldn't fathom the extent of this jolt. To them, upkeep was utilitarian, bound by rules and communal welfare. They delivered commands matter-of-factly, unaware that the standard deluges held such weighty significance for the held. Still, behind the barriers, figures tossed restlessly, gazing at the beams overhead, perceiving the cracks in the warrior existence they had embraced. Tolerating squalor wasn't valor. Overlooking sickness wasn't prestige. They started pondering, if the U.S. invests this heavily in the well-being of foes, imagine the commitment to its own ranks. The notion discomforted, but it echoed relentlessly. As days turned to weeks and then months, the sanitation regimen that had seemed foreign etched itself into the pulse of imprisonment. Each detainee memorized the daily sequence: rouse, muster, chow, and at set times, the trek to the washing area. What had previously been greeted with doubt transformed into a quiet, shared assumption. The sentries didn't have to shout as forcefully anymore, and the captives proceeded with less hesitation in their steps. They formed orderly queues, clutching bars of soap in their hands, with cloths slung over their backs, as if this had been their norm all along. The shift went beyond the surface. It touched their minds. The Japanese troops, disarmed and deprived of their purpose, unexpectedly recovered a sliver of self-respect. Their attire, now cleaned on a regular basis, shed the odor of rot. Their forms, scrubbed and inspected, were rid of parasites and suppurating injuries. Even the glassy images in shallow pools following showers showed revitalized features. Hollowed cheeks filled out somewhat, flesh marked by fewer blemishes from ulcers. This progress was impossible to refute, though few voiced it openly. Hygiene evolved to represent far more than mere endurance. It stood as evidence that they hadn't been wholly diminished to mere ghosts of their former selves. The changes spread throughout the quarters. Hacking coughs lessened in frequency. The constant clawing at infested heads faded away. Bedding carried a subtle scent of lather instead of dampness. Overseers noted, occasionally with a wry grin, that the Japanese detainees appeared more disciplined than upon their initial entry. Certain inmates, chafed by the comment, inwardly rebelled, holding fast to the idea that these habits aimed to break their spirit. But the reality was evident. They sensed greater vitality. Injuries mended more swiftly, rest came deeper, and their vigor, despite the confines of imprisonment, steadied. For a few, this evolution sparked a sense of honor over humiliation. They started arranging their linens precisely after use, buffing their footwear with extra diligence, maintaining the sleeping areas tidy and structured. It evoked distant customs from their homeland, the precise ceremonies of domestic life in Japan. They came to see that sanitation wasn't yielding to foes. It was retrieving pieces of their identity, shards lost beneath the grime and turmoil of battle. Discussions altered too. Individuals once too fatigued for words now exchanged subdued comments on the oddity of renewed freshness, on the paradox of better health in confinement than amid frontline chaos. U.S. medical staff, pragmatic and detached, documented the advancements. Reduced instances of diarrhea, fewer parasite outbreaks, lower mortality rates. To the Allies, it validated the regimen's efficacy. To the Japanese, it marked a revelation. They couldn't ignore how their keepers viewed sanitation as an element of regimen and esteem, not a luxury, but an obligation. This insight disturbed them, clashing profoundly with their warrior code, which prized tolerating squalor as a mark of toughness. In this place, the reverse held sway. Purity equaled structure, and structure equaled power. Gradually, the wariness that once shadowed the bathing areas dissolved nearly completely. No more murmurs of toxins in the lather or concealed malice in the conduits. Rather, they looked forward to the heat, even yearned for it. The practice turned into an awaited respite, a brief solace for the body in existence devoid of liberty. A handful of detainees tarried beneath the flows beyond permitted time, shutting their eyes as the liquid poured down, seemingly rinsing off not just filth, but echoes of loss. In the hush of those habits, numerous found that sanitation transcended enforced orders from watchers. It was a revival of worth, a means to reclaim humanity, even amid the fences of thorns. It marked a quiet, irrefutable metamorphosis, altering not just their physiques, but their core understanding of resilience. As fall gusts traversed the enclosure and daylight waned, dialogues among the detainees evolved. Gone were the hushed arguments over concealed toxins or veiled brutality. Discourse now centered on another form of wonder. The awareness that these everyday acts with lather, steaming liquid, and cloths weren't mere quirks of detention, but emblems of broader significance. In the shadowy sleeping halls where figures perched lotus-style on their pallets, they shared tales of initial brushes with the bathing rooms, chuckling uneasily at their past dread and expressing awe at the normalization. One detainee, formerly a rigid foot soldier commander, admitted that upon entering the vapor-filled space for the first time, he suspected a lethal ruse. The group laughed at the recollection, nodding ruefully as most owned up to similar apprehensions. A different fellow, slimmer and chattier, likened the site's washes to the grand communal spas of Tokyo from his youth. The likeness evoked soft sighs of longing, briefly carrying the men to realms of mosaic surfaces and pale scoops, to nights of communal coziness with kin and locals. The contradiction hit them deeply. It was under adversary control that bits of those recollections resurfaced. What troubled them deepest wasn't the showers in themselves that struck them most, but the insights they offered into the United States. If this nation could afford a constant supply of warm water for its captives, what provisions must it offer its troops? If cleansing bars and cloths were handed out so generously in this place, what indulgences awaited on domestic military installations? The disparity with their past ordeals ate away at their resolve. They recalled fellow fighters lost to sepsis from untreated injuries lacking fresh water, troops who trudged forward with parasites burrowing into their heads, warriors who deteriorated not just from famine, but from the gradual ruin inflicted by filth and illness. Coming to grips with the foe's focus on sanitation led several detainees to whisper, albeit cautiously, that this might explain a key aspect of U.S. superiority. Discussions loosened up near the dining benches as they consumed portions of loaf, tubers, or legumes. A few voiced their astonishment without restraint. They confessed that prior to surrender, they'd pictured U.S. forces as savage monsters. Rather, they encountered a systematic, disciplined approach, right down to routine washing. Certain individuals pushed the thought ahead, positing that it mirrored a society founded on plenty and precision, affluent enough to apply these habits to adversaries as well. Such notions ignited arguments since not everyone was ready to confront these jarring realities. National honor endured, and plenty recoiled at any hint of Yankee dominance. Still, the proof in their scrubbed flesh, mended injuries, and bolstered vitality was irrefutable. For a portion, this epiphany soured into resentment. They grumbled that such ease aimed to erode their toughness, the very resilience that had characterized imperial troops. For others, though, it stirred an uneasy admiration. They started seeing the bathing facilities not just as basic upkeep, but as a glimpse into the immense wealth, manufacturing prowess, and contrasting mindset of their jailers. In subdued voices, a handful even conceded that the ordeal had reshaped their vision of life outside the fences. In this way, the deluge chambers once dreaded as tools of torment evolved into hubs of enlightenment. They transcended mere suds and streams. They highlighted the glaring divide separating rival societies and the understanding that the opponent's might derived not solely from armaments, but from lifeways so sophisticated that even enemy detainees were drawn into their regimen. Decades afterward, as numerous Japanese detainees made their way back following the conflict's conclusion, the recollections of confinement stayed intricate, tinged with embarrassment, gratitude, and bewilderment. Among the myriad etchings left on their psyches, however, one vision endured with vivid sharpness: the showers. Fighters who had battled across remote atolls, witnessing allies perish in tropical traps and sea assaults, recalled chiefly the rush of heated streams from fixtures, the lather bubbling between fingers, the mandated cadence of purity that initially disturbed and ultimately altered them. Certain ex-detainees shared the tale with kin, haltingly recounting how the U.S. personnel had demanded regular sanitation. Spouses and parents heard it with incredulity. How might a rival extend such attention? Some chose quiet, hesitant to reveal that imprisonment had delivered amenities surpassing those from their military. Yet privately, numerous conceded that the facility's sanitation protocols had shifted their global outlook. The echo of boundless heated flow served as evidence of a culture alien to theirs, contemporary, plentiful, and structured in manners that Japan, for all its rigor and heritage, couldn't rival amid the wartime era. The reminiscence lacked warmth. To the detainees, the rinses had seemed odd, degrading, even alarming initially, yet duration molded those sentiments. As ailments receded, lesions closed, vermin disappeared, the link intensified. Purity signified power. They grasped that wellness wasn't an extravagance, but an instrument, one the U.S. deployed subtly but potently. In Barreric's dialogues post-release, several owned that this insight ranked as the profoundest takeaway, not concerning battle strategies, but the force of contemporary existence benchmarks. Scholars who subsequently questioned them observed the frequent recurrence of bathing in accounts. Distinct from provisions or labor duties, which differed across sites, the sanitation schedule was almost standard. It etched a mark profounder than allotments of baked goods or smokes. Individuals who had weathered deprivation in combat zones managed sparse facility fare without astonishment. But receiving cleansing agents and fabrics, being led to vapor-filled enclosures with scalding flows, this imprinted indelibly, for its complete foreignness to their conflict days. It embodied not excess, but a wholly alternate perspective, wherein the foe deemed even prisoners as beings deserving of upkeep. The enduring influence persisted subtly. Some ex-captives. Upon returning to everyday existence, those former prisoners clung to the practices ingrained during their imprisonment. They bathed with greater frequency, demanding soap despite its rarity. They instilled in their offspring the idea that personal cleanliness was a vital regimen, far from any frailty. To them, the communal showers in the camps transcended basic rituals. They represented profound insights, enduring teachings that spanned generations. Looking back, the recollection carried a mixed poignancy. It evoked images of loss, capitulation, and the degradation of becoming prisoners. Yet, it also evoked endurance, an unforeseen sense of self-respect amidst foes they had been conditioned to despise. For numerous survivors, this irony encapsulated their wartime ordeal, that amid utter debasement they had encountered a facet of progress they would never erase. Those showers went beyond mere washing with water and lather. They signified a realization that purity, structure, and attentiveness, even under duress, could reshape how an individual perceived his role in the broader scheme.